Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Saturday, December 3rd, 2022. We have a lot to talk about. I have a short public segment this evening, but if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can go to weather.gov, point and click anywhere on this map, and it'll bring up forecasts, watches, warnings, advisories for anywhere in the country. Most notable weather in the lower 48 this Saturday afternoon. Winter weather advisories for the mountains there in the interior northwest, and we have winter storm warnings in the Sierra Nevada mountains there of California. Lake Tahoe area is going to see as much as 1 to 3 feet of snow in elevations above 4,000 feet this weekend. Here in Alaska, winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories remain in effect for mainly west central areas of the mainland, including the coast and some of the western interior. We're seeing areas of accumulating snow that is mixed with and even changes over to some freezing rain at times as we have a surge of milder air working its way up there through the west coast. Also the potential for some minor coastal flooding Sunday into the pre-dawn hours of Monday morning for the Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays. And a large ridge of high pressure that's anchored over the Gulf and up through the eastern interior is going to push east and weaken early next week. So it's going to allow the pattern to open up and become a little more progressive here next week into next weekend. Let's quick check at some of the FAA webcams up there at Nome. Light snow fog 34, but you go a couple miles inland there, and there's reports around Nome as much as a quarter to a half inch of freezing rain has accumulated as ice, with some additional amounts on the order of a tenth or two expected here for now through tonight into early Monday morning. Areas further south and west, Quinhaget, expect mostly cloudy skies in portions of the west side of Bristol Bay, and Kuskokwim Bay could see water levels as much as 2 to 4 feet above high astronomical tide here Sunday into early Monday morning. And further toward south central, mostly cloudy at Willow. We've seen some ice develop on some of the creeks and small rivers around Anchorage, as well as on up there through the lower Mat-Su Valley. And there could be some minor flow around and freeze up of ice there along those creeks and things as we go through this weekend. Ketchikan and much of the Panhandle enjoying mostly sunny skies thanks to that ridge of high pressure and at least a drier flow of air that had come in from off the interior of northwest Canada. Here are the warnings. Winter storm warnings there, Ambler for the southwestern side of the Brooks Range and including Kotzebue, Kivalina, Shishmaref, west side of the Seward Peninsula, including Nome to Golovin. There could be freezing rain along with some strong gusty winds along coastal areas there through the Strait and including St. Lawrence Island. South winds could gust as high as 55 to 65 miles an hour along the coast. Perhaps another 1 to 3 inches of snow for the inland areas where it falls as freezing rain. Some areas could pick up another tenth or two of icing. Further to the southwest, we have a coastal flood advisory for Sunday into early Monday, Kuskokwim Bay and the west side of Bristol Bay. We expect water levels could be bumped up 2 to 4 feet above normal high astronomical tide as a result of a frontal system that will be approaching and pushing across the area Sunday afternoon and evening. Looking at the satellite imagery, we could see the curl in the clouds and the northward extent of the clouds moving there, the moisture, milder temperatures streaming northward. That's what's causing the precipitation along the west coast, and again with a little warmer air, slightly warmer air aloft, that sets up conditions that are favorable for freezing rain. So by late tonight, early Sunday morning, the frontal system there is off to the west with the southerly southeast to south flow continuing ahead of it. And then by the time we get into Sunday afternoon, the frontal system will be pushing into the southwest coast there, impacting Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays, and we'll continue to see potential for some mixed precipitation, including freezing rain up there along areas of the west coast and even sliding up along the northwestern coast. High still sitting there centered along the North Pacific and Gulf. That will begin to edge eastward and break down. Another frontal system follows in it, on the one there in the Bering, on the west side of the Bering. And that next system will be pushing on into the southwestern coast come Monday afternoon and especially Monday evening as high pressure begins to kind of relax its grip and break down across the eastern mainland. And then we are anticipating the pattern to become a bit more progressive as we go through next week, meaning systems are going to kind of move along more west to east from the Bering and North Pacific, and then start to get back into areas of South Central and the mainland. So Sunday morning lows below freezing there in the Panhandle. Coldest temperatures, though not as cold as what they were up there in areas, say Glen Ellen, 6 below, Northway. But look along the west coast, temperatures are going to be above freezing, and temperatures on Sunday afternoon could push up to 40 degrees there along areas of the southwest, including Dillingham and Bethel. Temperatures above freezing all the way up there along the northwest coast, just southwest of Utqiagvik. And then for Monday morning, we anticipate low temperatures to be a little slightly cooler, dip a bit below freezing there along the west and northwest coast. Little push of mild air will get in there into Kodiak Island, so Monday morning lows above freezing there. Some temperatures, isolated pockets of below zero along the Alcan border and through Yukon Flats, Northway, and the Copper River Basin. But temperatures Monday afternoon, once again, we are looking at readings to be in the 40s. Could hit 41 at Homer, 44 there at Kodiak, and extending out along the length of the Alaska Peninsula in through the Aleutians and even to the far north and west, maybe not quite as mild as it was over the weekend, but still temperatures near or just slightly below freezing. And looking at the temperature outlook, 6 to 10 day temperature outlook, December 9th to the 13th, just prior to mid-December. We do anticipate temperatures to cool back down across the south central areas in through the Panhandle. And in addition, we expect precipitation to average a bit below normal there in south central areas centered on the Kenai Peninsula and Cook Inlet, probably because we're going to see at times a little bit more of an offshore drier flow, but still potential for precipitation a little bit above average there across west side of the state.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Here's your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned Sunday or on Monday, we continue to watch a couple of frontal systems that are going to be pushing in through the west side of the state, coming in off the Bering. One of those will be moving in through the western coast, southwest coast here as we go through Sunday afternoon and evening, and then another one will follow for Monday evening. Meanwhile, we do see pockets of IFR conditions, especially south of the Alaska Range, Copper River Basin, and areas of the Mat-Su Valley, as well as north of the Alaska Range and in the far northeast interior on the southeast side of the Brooks Range, including areas of the North Slope. By Sunday afternoon, notice that fairly widespread IFR conditions, Chukchi coast down through the Seward Peninsula, much of the southwest. Also, they're nudging into Kodiak Island and out over the open waters of the Gulf, but we do have a fair amount of VFR and MVFR conditions across the interior mainland, and especially there through the Panhandle. Skies are mostly clear with VFR conditions in a number of locations. Monday morning, IFR lessens a bit, but you can see it remains there along areas of the west side of the state. And if you look further west out over the central Bering, there is another band of IFR conditions. That is that frontal system that will advance eastward and push another front into the southwest and west coast as we go through Monday evening and Monday night. Some of the IFR conditions are expected to expand into the interior and along the Alaska Range Monday afternoon as that moisture works its way eastward with the initial frontal system that'll be coming through Sunday afternoon and evening along the west coast. So Anatuvik Pass, MVFR conditions becoming VFR. Same thing, Adigan Pass, MVFR early Sunday giving way to VFR. Lake Clark, we're going to see some of that frontal moisture move in become IFR Sunday afternoon. Merrill, MVFR, just because Merrill passes a little farther north. Same thing, rainy pass VFR early Sunday, giving way to MVFR conditions. Windy pass should still be able to hold on to VFR conditions. We have this big ridge of high pressure in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere that's centered in the Gulf up into the eastern half of the mainland. That is going to shift eastward and weaken early this coming week. And we anticipate, as a result, that's going to allow those frontal systems, the weather pattern, to become a little more progressive, with a couple of lows and fronts there moving from the Bering and North Pacific eastward. Isabel Pass will see MVFR conditions become VFR, though there could be some IFR conditions early as you fly south of the south entrance. And Mentasta Pass should generally have VFR conditions. Tanita will see IFR conditions Sunday morning, giving way to MVFR. And Portage also IFR conditions, trying to give way to MVFR. Chilkoot and White and much of the Panhandle will enjoy VFR conditions on Sunday. Freezing levels. We find the surface freezing line has nudged northward with that push of milder air along the west coast. Also, we see the freezing levels aloft, upwards of 2,000 and 4,000 feet there through the lower Chukchi, as high as 6,000 and 8,000 feet from areas of the southwest interior, west of the Alaska Range, and then down across Kodiak Island ahead of that frontal system that'll be moving into the south and western coast areas Sunday afternoon and evening. Icing potential, considerable moderate icing is possible, areas of the Chukchi Sea, and especially from the Bering Strait southward down along the southwest coast, including Nunavik Island, St. Matthew, St. Paul, where the freezing levels there, we're looking for icing above 6,000 and 4,000 feet due to that influx of milder air aloft. Jet stream level winds, the ridge clearly shows up. We have the ridge center located just south of the Alaska Range, North Pacific, with the ridge axis extending right up through the middle of the mainland. And eventually that feature is going to work its way east and begin to break down. Strongest winds on the backside of the ridge axis entering the west coast. Southwesterly winds 60 to 80 knots there coming in through, this is at 700 millibars or 9,000 feet. And then we bring it down to 3,000 feet. You can see some much stronger winds, 50 to as high as 75 knots along areas of the west coast, especially from the Bering Strait down along the YK deltas. And this is going to translate to widespread severe turbulence from areas of the lower Chukchi Sea through the Bering Strait, and then winding on down along the southwest coast, surface to 3,000, surface to 4,000 feet. So bumpy rides out there with those frontal systems moving in, and I also won't even rule out the potential for some low-level wind shear in the vicinity of that front as it works its way, especially first in through the southwestern coastline during the latter half of the afternoon and evening hours on Sunday. So that wraps up the aviation weather. If you do have a flight plan, remember to check the latest forecast and observations, make a flight plan, and have a safe one if you are able to get off the ground.
We can't just put the fires out because we can't put them out. We've tried that now for a century and it doesn't work. It just makes the next one worse.
You may see a place like this and think, total devastation. And it's not your fault for thinking that.
But that depiction is, as we've learned from countless experts over the last 2 weeks, not the whole story, and not how you should think about wildfires.
The truth is, there are lots of types of habitats out west, and fire affects them all in unique ways. So it's important to start thinking about the big picture with wildland fires. So let's first rewind. To help us understand what's going on out west, Rob and I started calling up the experts, and what we found was that the story of fire, particularly in the west, is complex. So to understand it, we planned a road trip.
Road trip time!
The goal of our road trip was to see as many forests as we could and meet experts around the region to help us understand the role fire plays out here. First destination was to find the forest burned by the now famous Great Fires of 1910. And at the heart of what is known as the Big Blow-Up, the logical first place to stop, the city of Wallace.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. Good. Haley and I are in this cute town of Wallace, Idaho, which was completely destroyed by the 1910 fires. You can see how much damage this fire actually did. Let's send up the drone and see what the surroundings look like now. What we found was a small town surrounded by a dense forest, with every single tree just over 100 years old.
So everything we see behind us now, That's all new growth since 1910.
And to help us put these historic fires and the forests around Wallace in perspective, we met up with historian Diane Smith.
This is Wallace, and here are your fires.
All of this is the 1910 fires.
This is not that unusual. The fact is, it just was at a time in our development as a country. We noticed it, we paid attention to it, and we got the national attention for it.
Right.
As it turns out, these fires helped reinforce the idea at the time that every fire needed to be suppressed at all costs. And this suppression for so long has led to new problems, namely thick forests full of fuel. But don't just take my word for it. Let me show you the difference.
Notice how different this place is than this one that has been thinned out quite heavily in the past, or like an area like this that's been burnt quite frequently.
In fact, both of these areas show how many forests would have looked in the past under regular burns. The dead and low-growing material gets consumed easily by fire, very much unlike this forest, which has had fire suppression for over 100 years and could lead to a high-intensity fire.
And all of this dry, dead material, that's problematic.
So we went looking for a big fire and just followed the smoke. Oh gosh, huge crown fire. I gotta get this. These high-intensity fires aren't great because in many forests they kill all the trees over a large area, even in forests that used to be very resistant to frequent fires. And nobody knows that better than the people that work in this particular forest.
There's green coming back, and I guess I've gotten somewhat used to it, and I still have hope that the entire Sierra Nevadas won't look like this, that we can maybe get ahead of it. So the fires nowadays can move from the surface right into the tree canopies really easily, where in the past, fires would have kept trees pruned, they would have kept fuel densities low, and so now you end up with a lot more high severity fires in the West than had a fire regime kept under its historic recurrence. This to me is more a lesson of fire exclusion and keeping fire out of the system. If we're keeping it out of when it would burn with a beneficial effect, it will burn, and the probability of it burning at an unbeneficial state is higher.
So again, this is where it's complicated. We thought if only we could stop the fires, we'd win the fight. But the fires like the King Fire here show that stopping the fires only made it worse. Add that to the fact that we're living closer than ever to these wild lands. So to help us understand the wildland-urban interface, we met up with CAL FIRE. And as we were pulling up to this neighborhood, one of the residents quickly came out to tell us about the latest fire.
Yeah, our biggest fear is fire. It was very scary. I mean, everybody was honking and get out, and you know, there's a fire.
This is the risk across California. The response piece alone isn't going to solve this challenge if the homeowners aren't organized.
Because we're all in the same boat. One match away from everybody losing everything. It's a real fear.
Literally, we could have that fire spread up in here within a matter of seconds.
Wow.
California is going to have fires. We're not going to stop all the fires in California, so we have to have an infrastructure that's fire resistant. We need to work on policies that help us engage in active management of our forest. That's using prescribed fire as a tool. It's all the things in the toolbox. It's a combination of managing our forest and a combination of protecting our communities that are in them.
If it wasn't complicated enough, this made it very clear that you can't just let the fires burn whenever they start. The forests need to be managed to help mitigate the risk to us. But using fire seems to be one of the keys to making things safer, and knowing the science behind fire is always key to implementing good management.
Fire Sciences Lab, right over here.
So we made a stop at the Missoula Fire Lab to try to understand what we know about fire.
You see the flames at the very top and how they're sticking to the slope?
They really are. Everybody's laying down.
They're laying down. Well, that's flame attachment. Actually a very difficult thing to understand.
Here at the Fire Lab, the scientists study the basics of fire. Understanding the complexities here helps firefighters and forest managers in the field better predict and fight wildland fires.
Fires are inevitable. The only choices that we really have is what kind of fire to have and when do we want it. And that's it. Almost? Ready. You're ready. Jason's ready.
Mark's team is prepping to light a huge bed of precisely cut cardboard.
You're not going to be in any danger. So when the lights go out, don't move. Gasoline.
This is one of many experiments they'll run to understand the physics of fire, how it moves, how it spreads, and all of this measured by precise scientific instruments and high-speed cameras. Tens of thousands of pieces of cardboard up in flames in mere seconds. The ongoing research will help us better understand fire with the ultimate goal that we can live better with it. But can we do that? There is one forest we knew of that seems to have figured out this coexistence with fire, a place where fires burn all summer, every summer. It's part of their way of life and a mentality we wanted to know about. And here we went out with our guides Frank Lake and Steve Valentine, who work with the local U.S. Forest Service and tribe to help keep a healthy forest.
This is perfect. The fire's basically come through and cleared out the understory, and all that's left are the trees.
Yeah, it's black and it's charred, and you just see a few of the earliest sprouts, but you come back in here a year, it's gonna be alive again.
And to many, this may seem destroyed, but they view it differently here.
That fire's medicine. Because it's not if it comes, it's when it comes. We need fire, and fire needs us.
You see, fire needs people to remind us how important fire is to the ecosystem. Frank and Steve's ancestors have been burning this forest for millennia. It's now part of what makes the forest special. They just want to make sure that it's not forgotten.
Basically, what you leave behind is what's important.
When they say this is your foods and your medicines, your sacred places, your springs, your water, that's essential. That's who we are as people. We have to learn to live with fire. We have to learn to respect fire. We have to maintain that security. That's why I do what I do.
Haley and I have learned a lot on our journey. We've learned that fire is complicated, and it's not as black and white as we make it out to be, and it is an integral part of our forests. They've had fire running through them for thousands of years, and they will continue to have fire in them in the future. And we can't always put the fires out. We have to decide what kind of fires to live with, and that is why we need to work with these fire crews from around the country. We also need a public who understands the importance of fire on the landscape. A healthy forest, you see, is a forest that lives with fire.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Let's go right into the sea ice edge, and on this Saturday afternoon, we have lost a bit there along the northwest coast. It's shifted around in areas like Kotzebue Sound and especially Norton Sound. We've had some stronger southerly winds that have, or at least a stronger southerly component to winds, and that will persist here into the day on Monday. So expect this ice to continue to shift around, and on top of it, we've seen temperatures get above freezing there along areas of the southwest coast, and especially now up in and along areas of the Seward Peninsula, and those milder temperatures will spread further northeastward along the northwest coast. So expect the ice to shift around, and there's even been a little bit of the ice has diminished in extent a little bit in areas of the Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas. But aside from that, the other concern there on the southwest coast is a occluded front's going to have strong gale force southeast winds veer south-southwest from Sunday evening into Monday, and that's going to cause the potential for some higher water levels, 2 to 4 feet above normal astronomical tide there in through Kuskokwim and the west side of Bristol Bay, especially Sunday through the pre-dawn of Monday morning. In the southeast, winds will generally have a, northwest flow there, 15-20 knots through the inner channels, waves 3-4 feet. The outer coast, north-northwest winds generally in the 20-knot range, waves 6 to 9 feet-ish. And then on Monday, winds do pick up a bit on the outer coast. We see winds increase northwest, 25 to 30 knots, waves 9 feet Yakutat, upwards to 13 feet west of Craig. Inner channels retain a northerly component to the wind at 15 knots, and waves generally running a few feet. Northwestern Gulf, variable winds 10 knots in Prince William Sound, waves a couple of feet, waves only a foot or so upper Cook Inlet, but winds southeast to 25 knots will create waves of 5 to 7 feet at the entrance of Cook Inlet. On Monday, winds are going to try to turn more to the north and northeast across Cook Inlet at 10 to 15 knots with waves of 3 to perhaps 4 or 5 feet there off of Anchor Point. Within Prince William Sound, north winds 10 knots, waves 2 feet, and southwest winds 15 to 20 knots off the Kenai, waves 8 to 10 feet. Stronger winds shaping up in the southwest and across the Alaska Peninsula. We'll see south-southeast winds 25 knots Kodiak Island, but increasing to 40 to 45 knots southeasterly gales along the length of the Alaska Peninsula associated with that frontal system. Waves building on the order of 15 to 19 feet on the North Pacific side and 10 to 12 feet on the Bering side. For Monday, look for southwest winds 15 to 20 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island. But winds will be still have a southwest component as high as 35 to 40 knots as you get out along the extent of the peninsula. South of Sand Point, 13-foot waves, and north of Cold Bay, we're looking at waves upwards of 13 feet. Across the eastern Aleutians on Sunday, winds will go from the south-southwest, veer more toward the west, 40 to 45 knot gale force winds. Waves 18 to 22 feet on the North Pacific side, away from the shelter of the islands, and 20 to maybe 22, 23 feet on the Bering side, away from the shelter of the islands, with the highest waves in the vicinity of the eastern Aleutians. Monday, in the wake of this frontal system, look for widespread winds anywhere from 35 to 45 knot gales from the south-southwest, and waves running 17 to 22 feet on the North Pacific side and 16 to generally 19 feet through the eastern and central Aleutians on the Bering side. 45 knot southeast winds off the southwest coast, and waves could be anywhere from 16 feet south of St. Lawrence Island to 18 to 20 feet as you go down towards St. Paul and St. George. 35 knot southeast winds across Norton Sound will cause that ice to shift around, and on Monday winds continue out of the south there in Norton Sound, not quite as strong, 25 knots, but still it's enough to move things around, and we retain gale force and even some storm force winds of 40 to 50 knots from the southeast to south, trying to veer southwest down towards St. Paul and St. George, with waves over the open waters of the eastern Bering running anywhere from about 15 to as high as 20 feet. Arctic coast, 30 to 35 knot east-southeast winds with ice in place, but lower Chukchi Sea, look for the winds to increase to 40 knot gales through the lower Chukchi Sea through the Bering Strait, with waves 8 feet in the lower Chukchi Sea and as high as 16 feet south of the Bering Strait. And then on Monday, east winds 30 to 40 knots Arctic coast and 35 to 40 knot gales there through the lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.